There's a famous saying in sport: no one remembers who finishes in second. And today we are taking that a little bit too seriously, to the point that finishing second is equivalent to having finished last or even getting disqualified. Consistency is thrown in the bin, and everything is on the line for the win. However, it's not just the front of the field that's getting affected by this. We're changing the points so that instead of going from 1st down to 10th, they're given to 1st, 3rd, 5th, all the way down to 17th and 19th place. It means that finishing in P7 could be season defining for a backmarker team, and if you DNF from the race, then your chance for points still remains. So how does the 2024 F1 season shape up when only the odd positions are getting the points? The opening round of the odd positions only championship in 2024 takes us to Bahrain, where none other than reigning champion Max Verstappen grabs the win with both hands, leading the race by 25 seconds back to P2 man Carlos Sainz. Max also managed to pick up the fastest lap point on his way to this win, the fastest lap point in this championship working in the same way as it did in 2024. If you finish in the points and you get the fastest lap, then you get the bonus point. If you finish out with the odd positions and get the fastest lap, then you don't get the bonus point. Carlos Sainz, as I mentioned, coming home in P2, battling past teammate Charles Leclerc not once but twice during this race, and George Russell in P3 rounds out our opening race's podium. The big scalps disqualified in this one were Sergio Perez in P2, Charles Leclerc in P4 and Lando Norris in P6, blatantly finishing in the positions getting no points. They should have read the title before the race. Thanks to the change made in this video, Sauber get a lovely double points finish with Zhou picking up big points, and Albon, Ricciardo and Ocon also score in the opening round. The Drivers' Championship after round 1 just reflects that opening race's result. However, in the Constructors' Championship we can see that Mercedes have taken the early lead with a slender advantage over Red Bull. The second race of the season sees second place man last time out Carlos Sainz out with appendicitis, and he is replaced by none other than Oliver Bearman, the youngster rookie, for his first race in F1. In the race in Saudi Arabia, nothing was stopping Max Verstappen. Another win back-to-back to start this season. Another dominant win at that, 18 seconds ahead of P2 man, who was Charles Leclerc, the other Ferrari driver, and he managed to pick up fastest lap on his way there. And in P3 was Fernando Alonso, his 107th podium in Formula 1, and rounds out our podium here in Saudi Arabia. But the big story here has to be Oliver Bearman's debut heroics, coming home in P4 to score big points for Ferrari. It's the best debut performance, or best debut finish in Formula 1 since Kevin Magnussen's P2 finish on debut back in 2014. However, given our very realistic rules that we've got here, Kevin should feel very lucky that he's not racing now with that debut, because that P2 finish would have been a disqualification. Sergio Perez once again finishing in P2, not quite understanding the point of this video. Piastri in P4, another missing out on big points. But Albon, Ocon, Tsunoda and Bottas all pounced on the opportunity to pick up points, and even Lance Stroll, who absolutely binned it into the wall, picks up a solitary point in this one. Max Verstappen's lead after 2 rounds is substantial, 26 points over P2 man Fernando Alonso, who gains big positions after his podium this time out. Lewis Hamilton is in P3 after 2 points finishes back to back. We've got Leclerc and Bearman both gaining massive positions in the Drivers' Championship, and on the second page we can see how things are shaping up lower down. And our Constructors' Championship sees Red Bull taking the lead, just 2 points over Ferrari at this stage. Further down we've got Williams grabbing P5, and the only teams yet to score so far this season are McLaren and Haas. The Australian Grand Prix greets us for round 3 in the championship, where Max Verstappen's chances of maintaining his 100% win streak evacuate him on just lap 3 with a brake failure. However, due to Alex Albon binning it in practice 3 and Williams not being able to rebuild his chassis in time, thus giving Logan Sargent's chassis to Alex Albon, it meant that there were only 19 runners in the race, and this means that Max Verstappen retiring on lap 3 meant that he got P19 in the race, or P10 in this universe, meaning that he still maintains his 100% scoring streak to start this season, despite having retired from the race. Once Max Verstappen was out of the race, it was all Carlos Sainz for the win, and he comes home to become our second different winner in this season. We've got Lando Norris in P2 picking up McLaren's first points and first podium of the season, and Sergio Perez in P3 finally learns how this video works. Yuki Tsunoda and Nico Hülkenberg both score incredibly well here in P4 and P5. Alex Albon puts Logan Sargent's chassis to good use in P6. Guan Yu Zhou scores again in P8, and George Russell, another to DNF in this race, picks up 2 points. With that win for Carlos Sainz in this race, it takes him up to P2 in the championship, just 9 points behind leader Max Verstappen. Alex Albon is up to P5 in the championship after 3 point scoring performances in a row. We've got Lando Norris pulling himself out of the trenches with that P2 finish, and also Yuki Tsunoda and Sergio Perez move on to page 1. On page 2, Nico Hülkenberg and Pierre Gasly both climb 5 positions each, as we've just got 3 drivers yet to score this season. In the Constructors' Championship, it's Ferrari who hit the front, as RB and McLaren both make gains further back. We head to Japan next, where Max Verstappen continues his dominant start to the season, picking up the win here with fastest lap. P1 and P2 from the last race, Sainz and Norris are P2 and P3 here, with Carlos Sainz maintaining a 100% podium to starts ratio this season. The Mercedes drivers pick up a fairly solid P4 and P5 finish here, as it's Perez, Leclerc, Piastri and Alonso all failing to score. Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen build on Haas's points total from last time out. Ocon returns to the points, Logan Sargent scores for the first time this season in P9, and Daniel Ricciardo, despite DNFing from this race, picks up 1 point. Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz are running away with things out front as things stand, as Lando Norris jumps up into P3, George Russell up into P5, and Nico Hülkenberg up into P9. And on page 2, Kevin Magnussen and Logan Sargent gain positions, as it's McLaren's Oscar Piastri, the only driver yet to score this season. In the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull are now just 1 point ahead of Ferrari, as McLaren and Haas gain massively. The Chinese Grand Prix brings us our first sprint race of the season, and with it comes our first 1-2 of the season for Red Bull. Verstappen continuing to do Verstappen type things, and Perez coming home in P2. Familiar face Carlos Sainz comes home in P3, with Oscar Piastri getting his first points of the season in P4, and Guan Yu Zhou scoring at his home race. And in the main race, we've got the exact same podium as the sprint, with Verstappen taking the win, Perez in P2 and Carlos Sainz in P3. Excellent performance by all 3 drivers. Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc and George Russell are the big hitters missing out here, but we've got Fernando Alonso returning to the points and getting the fastest lap point. We've got Lewis Hamilton getting his 3rd P5 finish of the season so far, and the Alpines replicate their double points finish in the sprint with a double points finish here. Lance Stroll grabs P8, Logan Sargent gets back-to-back P9 finishes, and Yuki Tsunoda rounds out the points in P10. With Max picking up wins in both the sprint and the main race here, his lead in the Drivers' Championship is now 29 points, as Lewis Hamilton moves up into P3, closely followed by Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez. Esteban Ocon breaches the first page and is up 6 positions after this round, and on page 2, his Alpine teammate Pierre Gasly is up 2 positions, as Oscar Piastri is finally off the bottom of the championship. Red Bull's dominance here in China sees them absolutely miles out front in the Constructors' Championship now, with Aston Martin moving past McLaren and Alpine's big weekend seeing them up 3 positions. Miami brings us our second sprint race of the season so far, and it brings us the exact same podium as we've had for the last 2 races, Verstappen taking the win ahead of Perez and Carlos Sainz. We've also got Nico Hülkenberg re-entering the points and Alpine continuing their strong run of form. But in the main race, Verstappen is finally stopped, as the silly man finishes in P2, which gets him no points, and it also paves the way for Lando Norris to pick up his first win in Formula 1. He does so ahead of the 2 Ferrari cars, Charles Leclerc in P2, getting just his 2nd points finish of the season so far, and Carlos Sainz in P3 has finished P3 for the last 4 races. Yuki Tsunoda equals his best result of the season in P4, ahead of Fernando Alonso and Nico Hülkenberg, both continuing their strong runs. Oscar Piastri scores for just the 2nd time this season and gets the fastest lap point on his way there, and behind him we've got Daniel Ricciardo, Kevin Magnussen, and someone that I've forgotten. Sainz cuts Verstappen's advantage at the top of the championship to just 15 points as Norris's win here catapults him up into P3. Albon gets past Perez by just 1 point as Leclerc, Hülkenberg and Tsunoda all gain places. And in the second half of the championship we can see that Albon has lost 3 places after this round and the Aussies are on the rise. The gap at the top of the Constructors' Championship is now 14 points as we can see McLaren just 1 point behind Mercedes and RB have gotten past Alpine. At the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, Max Verstappen bounces back from that horrible disappointment last time out to take the win. After an all-or-nothing battle against Lando Norris towards the end of the race, he managed to stave him off and take home that win. We've got Charles Leclerc in P2 picking up back-to-back P2 finishes, and Carlos Sainz is P3 again. What on earth? George Russell grabs P4 with the fastest lap point ahead of Lance Stroll getting his best result of the season so far, and Nico Hülkenberg getting back-to-back P6 finishes. Ricciardo gets a valiant P7 finish ahead of Zhou, Sargent and Alonso rounding out the points. Charles Leclerc is up to P4 in the championship, just 3 points back from Lando Norris, as George Russell gets past teammate Lewis Hamilton on countback, and Nico Hülkenberg is just 3 points behind them. On page 2, Guan Yu Zhou is up to P12, we've got Ricciardo up to P14, Stroll gains 4 positions, and Oliver Bearman is still ahead of Oscar Piastri, having only raced once this season. In the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari's double podium here puts them within touching distance of Red Bull ahead, and Nico Hülkenberg's recent performances have put Haas ahead of Alpine. And in the battle for the wooden spoon, Sauber are just 2 points off of Williams. At the Monaco Grand Prix, it's home hero Charles Leclerc that leads home a Ferrari 1-2, their first 1-2 of the season, and Charles becomes our 4th different race winner of the season. Carlos Sainz in P2 maintains his insane record of having a podium in every single race he started this season, and George Russell in P3 gets his 2nd podium of the season so far. Oscar Piastri missed out on P2, just 4 tenths ahead of Carlos Sainz in this one, and Norris just a second back from the Spaniard means that McLaren missed out massively here, and Max Verstappen, getting disqualified on this one, loses big ground in the championship. Lewis Hamilton follows home teammate George Russell in P4 with the fastest lap point as well, as Alex Albon and Logan Sargent pick up a massive double points finish for Williams. Valtteri Bottas gets his best result of the season, as both Nico Hülkenberg and Esteban Ocon both scored despite having DNF'd in this race, a big brain play. All this puts Carlos Sainz just 8 points back from Max Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship. Charles Leclerc has put some daylight between himself and Lando Norris, who now has both Mercedes and Fernando Alonso for company. Alex Albon storms into the top half of the standings, as both Sargent and Bottas scoring here puts Kevin Magnussen last place in the championship. Unsurprisingly, Ferrari's 1-2 finish here sees them back atop the Constructors' Championship. Aston Martin benefit from McLaren's double disqualification here, as Williams jump up ahead of Alpine due to Alex Albon finishing P5. We head to the Canadian Grand Prix next, where Verstappen continues his run of win nothing across the last 4 main races, with a win here, and extends his championship advantage massively as Carlos Sainz DNFs and stupidly does so in P16, meaning he gets no points. It's back-to-back podium finishes for George Russell in P2, having Lando Norris just half a second ahead and Lewis Hamilton just half a second back. It really could have gone either way and he'd end up with 0 points, and Oscar Piastri rounds out our podium and has finally worked out how this championship works and can hopefully start to turn around his season from here. Lance Stroll and Pierre Gasly both get their best result of the season so far, and Nico Hülkenberg has finished in P6 in 3 of the last 4 races. Sauber get a much needed double points finish here after Williams' heroics last time out, as Leclerc and Albon, 2 retirees from the race, both score here. George Russell takes a big leap towards Charles Leclerc for P3 in the championship after his podium here, and Nico Hülkenberg gets past Sergio Perez. And only 4 points separate Yuki Tsunoda on page 1 all the way down to Esteban Ocon in P16. Absolute scenes. And in the Constructors' Championship, Haas and Alpine move past both Williams and RB. Round 10 of the odd positions only championship brings us to Barcelona, where Max Verstappen gets win number 7 this season already. Lewis Hamilton in P2 picks up his first podium of the season, and Charles Leclerc in P3 makes it 4 podiums in the last 5 rounds. Lando Norris once again misses out on points here in P2, George Russell misses out in P4, and crucially for the Drivers' Championship, Carlos Sainz misses out in P6. Oscar Piastri backs up his podium last time out with a solid 12 points here, as Gasly, Hülkenberg and Zhou get back-to-back P5, P6 and P7s respectively. Hülkenberg has been P6 in 4 out of the last 5 rounds, which is insane, and Kevin Magnussen rounds out the point as the filling in an RB sandwich. Max Verstappen's back-to-back wins and Carlos Sainz's back-to-back disqualifications means that the gap at the top in the Drivers' Championship is suddenly 58 points. Lewis Hamilton is closing in on his teammate George Russell, and Oscar Piastri and Pierre Gasly both join the first page. And the midfield is still incredibly close, as Zhou gains 2 places here. Red Bull claw the gap to Ferrari back to just 3 points, as McLaren get past Aston Martin and Sauber get past Williams. Austria is up next on the calendar, where we have our 3rd sprint race of the season, and thankfully Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz return to their rightful positions of P1 and P3 this season, with Lando Norris in P2 picking up his first sprint points of the season so far. But in the main race here, George Russell comes home in P1, benefiting from an all-or-nothing scrap between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, which ended up in the Briton DNFing from the race and being the only driver to do so, meaning that he ends with 0 points. Max managed to recover though to a respectable P3 finish. And in P2, none other than 2nd place in the championship man, Carlos Sainz, gaining on Verstappen in the championship for the first race since Monaco. Perez in P4 picks up his first points since the Miami sprint race, Daniel Ricciardo gets his best result of the season so far, and a Williams double points finish sandwiches Guan Yu Zhou. In the Drivers' Championship after this round, George Russell makes some big progress up to the back of Charles Leclerc, as Sergio Perez moves ahead of both Nico Hülkenberg and Fernando Alonso. Alex Albon is just 1 point behind Oscar Piastri now, who was disqualified in P2 here in Austria. Page 2 sees movement all over the shop, with Ricciardo, Magnussen and Stroll all up 2 positions each. And in the Constructors' Championship, there's just 5 points in it at the sharp end at this stage, with RB overtaking Alpine. The British Grand Prix brings us the halfway point in our championship this season, and with it comes a truly beautiful moment. Lewis Hamilton picking up his first win in Formula 1 in 945 days, and doing it at his home race too. Lando Norris grabs P2, his first points in a main race since Miami, and Carlos Sainz unbelievably finishes P3 again, this time with the fastest lap point. Lance Stroll matches his best result of the season so far in P4, with a mighty Williams performance behind him in P5 and P6. Ricciardo, Bottas, Perez and a retired George Russell round out the points finishers. Hamilton's win pulls him to just 3 points behind George Russell, as both Albon and Stroll make gains here. On page 2, Ricciardo jumps up to P12, Logan Sargent gets ahead of Valtteri Bottas, and Oliver Bearman is finally last. Having completed just 1 race this season, he's finally last at the halfway point. In the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari extend their advantage out front, and in a very close bottom half scrap, RB hit the front. There's just 7 points in it from P6 down to P9. Into the second half of the season we venture, and it's a much needed change of fortunes for Oscar Piastri, who picks up the win here in Hungary. However, I'm not sure if this rule had been activated in real life, Lando Norris would have given up that win, going from 25 points all the way to 0. Lewis Hamilton continues his purple patch with a P2 finish here, and Max Verstappen returns to the podium in P3. Sergio Perez is back in the points in P4 here, and Yuki Tsunoda's P5 finish is a great result for him, having scored just 3 points across the last 6 rounds. Alonso, in a similar vein, had just 1 point across the last 4 rounds before this race, and he finishes ahead of the 2 Hasses, followed up by Logan Sargent and Guan Yu Zhou. Lewis Hamilton gets himself past both current and future teammates George Russell and Charles Leclerc with that P2 finish, and Oscar Piastri is up 4 positions after that race win. And in the bottom half, Yuki Tsunoda is up 3 positions, taking him back past teammate Daniel Ricciardo. And in the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull's 3rd and 4th finish here takes them back ahead of Ferrari, and they are now in the lead for the first time since Imola. The Belgian Grand Prix keeps that Lewis Hamilton gravy train going as he picks up the win here. Very fortunate that George Russell was disqualified, otherwise he would be getting nothing here, much like Oscar Piastri, who was just 6/10 off the win here and, as we all know, gets 0 points. Charles Leclerc is back on the podium here in P2, holding off Max Verstappen towards the end of the race, who gets 0 points, and Lando Norris in P3 gets on the podium. Sergio Perez makes it 3 P4 finishes in the last 4 races, this one with the bonus fastest lap point, and behind him we've got the Alpines sandwiching Lance Stroll, and we've got the Saubers sandwiching Logan Sargent. Not an awful lot of movement on page 1 in the Drivers' Championship, other than Lance Stroll ascending, and on page 2 we can see that the Alpines are gaining positions. And in the Constructors' Championship, the gap at the top is just 3 points between Ferrari and Red Bull, as Alpine are now just 1 point behind RB. At the Dutch Grand Prix, there is no home hero Max Verstappen to be seen after a shameful P2 finish, rendering him with 0 points. But taking the win here was Lando Norris, getting his 2nd win of the season, this one with the bonus point for the fastest lap, and he is 25 seconds ahead of P2. What a performance. It's another Ferrari double podium this season, with Charles Leclerc getting back-to-back P2 finishes, and Carlos Sainz returns to P3. That's 7 P3 finishes this season so far. Russell grabs P4 ahead of Gasly, heading up another solid performance for the Alpines, and Nico Hülkenberg picks up his 6th place this season. In the Drivers' Championship, Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris make their way past both Mercedes drivers, as Nico Hülkenberg gets past both Alonso and Piastri. And in the bottom half of the championship, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, and Valtteri Bottas all gain places. And unfortunately, Logan Sargent losing P18 in the championship is enough for Williams to call it a day on his F1 career. Absolutely heartbreaking stuff. He wasn't even doing that badly in this championship, but it's time for him to go. He is replaced by Franco Colapinto for the following round. No points for Red Bull in that round see them fall significantly behind Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship, as both Alpine and Haas move past RB. At the Italian Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc follows up his back-to-back P2 finishes with the win in front of the adoring Tifosi. What a run he is on. Lando Norris comes home in P2 to extend his podium streak to the last 3 races, and Lewis Hamilton comes home in P3, his first P3 finish this season, having had 4 podiums previously this year. George Russell follows home his teammate in P4, just narrowly behind Max Verstappen, our championship leader, who has been disqualified 3 rounds in a row, getting 0 points. What a loser. Alex Albon gets his 3rd P5 finish of the season ahead of Fernando Alonso's 3rd P6 of the season, with Ricciardo, Gasly, Hülkenberg and Stroll rounding out our points finishers. In the Drivers' Championship, the gap at the top is still 41 points, but Charles Leclerc is definitely closing in on Carlos Sainz for P2. As further down, Fernando Alonso gets past Nico Hülkenberg, and in the bottom half of the standings, we can see Alex Albon take P12, and Daniel Ricciardo gets past teammate Tsunoda. And in the Constructors' Championship, 2 back-to-back pointless rounds for Red Bull see them falling away massively from the title, as RB get back past Haas. The streets of Baku greet us for round 17 in the odd positions only championship, where Oscar Piastri gets his 2nd P1 of the season ahead of George Russell getting his 2nd P2 this season, and Max Verstappen returns to the points with a P3 podium. An intense end to the race here saw Sergio Perez taking out his teammate Verstappen's title rival Carlos Sainz, who could have finished P2, in a calculated move that saw him finishing P9 with 2 points. Albon's P4 is his best result of the season so far, ahead of Hamilton in P5, Hülkenberg in P6 again, and Ricciardo gets back-to-back P7 finishes. Max Verstappen's gap at the top of the Drivers' Championship is now 56 points as he closes in on his 4th title on the bounce. We can see that George Russell has drawn level with Lando Norris, and Sergio Perez has been passed by Oscar Piastri. Alex Albon's back in the top half of the standings, as on page 2 we can see that Esteban Ocon has gotten past Yuki Tsunoda. Also worth noting that Oliver Bearman raced for a second time this season, this time replacing Kevin Magnussen, however was unable to score. And in the Constructors' Championship, Haas moved past RB, but there's still only 10 points in it from P6 down to P9. Singapore is next on the calendar, where we've got a 1-2 for McLaren. Lando Norris getting win number 3 this season, 40 seconds ahead of teammate Piastri, who picks up back-to-back podiums. Ferrari get a 3-4 finish with Charles Leclerc picking up 4 podiums in his last 5 races. Nico Hülkenberg gets a very strong P5 finish, and Franco Colapinto gets his first points finish in Formula 1 in P6. The Alpine sandwich Zhou Guanyu, and Kevin Magnussen gets 1 solitary point on his return from suspension. Lando Norris's win here takes him up into P4 in the Drivers' Championship, and Nico Hülkenberg has made his way past Sergio Perez for P8. And in the bottom half, Esteban Ocon gets past Daniel Ricciardo on countback, they're level on points, but this is all she wrote for Daniel Ricciardo's season, an absolute robbery. He's 8 points ahead of Yuki Tsunoda and still gets sacked. Crazy stuff from RB, but they're replacing him with Liam Lawson for the rest of the season. Let's see how he gets on. And in the Constructors' Championship, the karma for RB is that they've dropped behind Williams for P8. Sprint race number 4 takes place at the Circuit of the Americas, where Max Verstappen steps on the top step of the podium for the first time since our sprint race in Austria. Lando Norris continues his strong recent run ahead of George Russell in P3, and Kevin Magnussen gets a massive P4 finish for Haas. And in the main race, it's Charles Leclerc that takes the top step of the podium, his 3rd race win of the season so far. We've got Max Verstappen in P2, the win in the sprint and P2 in the main race means that he's extracted a fair chunk of points here. And Oscar Piastri is in P3, getting 3 main race podiums on the bounce. Sainz, Norris and Russell all miss out on the big points here, but we've got Sergio Perez in P4 and Liam Lawson in P5 on his debut. What a legend. Kevin Magnussen follows up his strong sprint performance with a strong main race performance, and he's followed home by the 2 Aston Martins and the 2 Saubers. Leclerc's win and recent run of form have moved him up into P2 in the Drivers' Championship, as Sergio Perez moves back past Nico Hülkenberg. And on page 2, Kevin Magnussen gains 2 positions, and Liam Lawson moves past Franco Colapinto. And in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren close in on Mercedes, Haas move past Alpine, and RB get back past Williams. At the Mexican Grand Prix, Carlos Sainz looks to revitalise his season as he takes home the win in a Ferrari 1-2. Leclerc, of course, in P2, and in P3 we've got George Russell, his 3rd P3 of the season. And all the Norris and Verstappen controversy that occurred at the 2024 Mexican Grand Prix is all for nothing because they both score no points here. But what we do have is a very strong 4-5 finish for Haas, big points for them, and Lance Stroll has been steadily scoring some points recently. Ocon and Zhou follow them, and Sergio Perez does indeed score points at his home race. The Ferrari boys are now level on points with just 4 rounds to go. George Russell is closing in on teammate Hamilton, and Lance Stroll is closing in on teammate Fernando Alonso. And in the bottom half, the Alpine boys are now level on points, and Tsunoda still isn't even past Daniel Ricciardo yet. And for the first time this video, in the Constructors' Championship, everything remains the same. At the Brazilian Grand Prix, we have the penultimate sprint race of the season, where Lando Norris takes home the win after a McLaren team order sacrificed Oscar Piastri, and it's followed up by a Ferrari 2-3, Charles Leclerc in P2, and Carlos Sainz returns to his rightful P3. We've also got a very tasty double points finish for both Alpine and RB, with Liam Lawson scoring well. And in the main race, of course, that majestic Max Verstappen drive brings him from near the back of the grid all the way to P1, picking up the fastest lap point on his way there. Esteban Ocon misses out on massive points here, being disqualified in P2, but fortunately for the Alpine team, Pierre Gasly is there to pick up the pieces, taking home his first podium of the season, and Charles Leclerc in P3 gets 3 podiums in a row. Yuki Tsunoda leads home a huge haul of points for the RB team ahead of Sergio Perez, followed by the 2 Saubers, and Colapinto scores for the 2nd time this season. In the Driver Championship, Charles Leclerc has pulled away from Carlos Sainz in the battle of the Ferraris, and Pierre Gasly's podium here moves him on to page 1. And on page 2, Yuki Tsunoda finally gets past Daniel Ricciardo as Liam Lawson gains 2 places. And in the Constructors' Championship, Alpine and Haas are now level on points, and they're not even a million miles away from Aston Martin. It's Vegas, baby, and George Russell takes home the win, his 2nd of the season so far. The Lewis Hamilton fight back from P10 on the grid was all for nothing because he's disqualified, but it's Carlos Sainz that takes home P2 in his place, and Verstappen backs up his majestic drive in Brazil with a P3 finish here. A P3 finish which is enough for him to clinch the title. Max Verstappen is your 2024 odd positions only champion, with 2 races and 1 sprint still to go. Oscar Piastri picks up P4 ahead of another strong result for Yuki Tsunoda. Zhou is sandwiched by the Aston Martins, and it's Albon and Ocon that round out the points. Despite the title being wrapped up, there's still a lot to play for. Sainz is just 2 points up on Leclerc, Norris and Russell are both very close, and Alonso and Gasly are both very close. And even in the bottom half, there's still many points and positions to be gained. And in the Constructors' Championship, it looks like Ferrari are on the cusp of the title, as Alpine, Haas and RB are all split by just 3 points. The final sprint race of the season takes place in Qatar, where Lando Norris gifts the win to Oscar Piastri, and George Russell comes home in P2, which is a big swing in that particular championship battle. And Charles Leclerc comes home in P3, picking up 6 points, being enough for Ferrari to win the Constructors' Championship, ending their insane 16-year drought. Tifosi are going crazy. And in the main race, having already won the championship, Max Verstappen grabs win number 9, stamping his authority on this season. Piastri backs up his sprint dub with a P2 here, and Pierre Gasly gets a 2nd podium of the season in P3. What a king. Alonso, Magnussen and Bottas all get strong points finishes here, with Tsunoda ahead of a Perez-filled Williams sandwich. Leclerc has a 4-point lead in the P2 battle. Russell has put a little bit of distance between himself and Lando Norris after this round, and Gasly's P3 and Alonso's P4 have put them within striking distance of Nico Hülkenberg. I also have to mention the fact that Oscar Piastri is just 9 points back from Lewis Hamilton now. Hamilton has literally scored only 3 points since Baku. On page 2, Yuki Tsunoda is now just 1 point behind Alex Albon as Kevin Magnussen moves past Daniel Ricciardo. And in the Constructors' Championship, we can see that Alpine and Haas have both moved past RB. We head to Abu Dhabi for the final round of the season, and with both championship titles wrapped up, we'll breeze through the results here, where Lando Norris takes home P1, Charles Leclerc takes home P2, and George Russell grabs P3. Gasly and Alonso's close fight in the championship goes right down to the wire, with both drivers scoring well here in Abu Dhabi. Albon and Zhou finish the season strongly ahead of Jack Doohan, who replaced Esteban Ocon for the final race of the season and gets points on his debut. Great signs for his following season's full-time seat at Alpine. He's sure to do well after this strong opening performance. So after all that, here are your final drivers' standings. We've got Max Verstappen on top, Charles Leclerc pips Carlos Sainz to P2, George Russell pips Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly gets P9 on the final day ahead of Fernando Alonso on countback. Wait a second, what's happening? Oh boy, the even numbers have all been disqualified, and here's the actual standings. And when it comes to the Constructors' Championship, this is what things did look like, but when you take those disqualifications into account, this is what the Constructors' Championship looks like. Honestly, I've confused myself here, and I don't really know what's going on. But if you could leave a comment below who you think deserves to win the Constructors, is it McLaren or is it Ferrari? And on that terrible disappointment, if you're looking for another chaotic yet meaningless championship, look no further than my last equals first championship. Click here to watch that one. And if you're still here, then I just want to say a massive thank you for watching this video and supporting the channel. This is my last video in this setup, so RIP, goodbye to this setup, but I'm going to be making more excellent content and hopefully better content in the new setup, so look forward to that. Thanks guys.